The morning I found out my wife had been crying over my photo every night was the same morning I'd decided to ask her for a divorce. I remember standing in the kitchen at 6:15, watching the coffee drip into the pot, rehearsing the words in my head. Emily, I think we both know this isn't working. I'd been rehearsing them for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of sleeping on opposite sides of a king-sized bed with a canyon between us, 3 weeks of one-word answers over dinner, 3 weeks of reaching for her hand and watching her pull it away like my touch was something to be tolerated rather than welcomed. 3 weeks of being made to feel like a stranger in my own marriage, in my own home. I poured my coffee. I heard her heels on the stairs. I steeled myself. She walked into the kitchen in her army uniform, her dark hair pinned back with mathematical precision, her posture so straight it looked like someone had replaced her spine with a steel rod. Lieutenant Colonel Emily Hartley, that was what I'd married. Not just a woman, a rank, a bearing, a wall of professional composure that I had never once been able to scale. Morning, I said. Morning. She opened the refrigerator, took out her meal-prepped breakfast container, and ate it standing at the counter with her eyes on her phone. I watched her. I thought about the man I'd been 5 years ago when I met her, a civil engineer working a contract near Fort Bragg, 32 years old, completely undone by a woman in uniform who argued military infrastructure policy with me for 2 hours at a base contractor dinner and then smiled at me as she left like she'd just won something. I had fallen so completely and so fast that I'd proposed within a year. My mother had called it rushing. My best friend, Derek, had called it the best decision I'd ever made. What would they call it now? Watching Emily eat her breakfast without looking at me. I need to talk to you tonight, I said, when you get home. She looked up from her phone. Those gray eyes, God, even now, even after everything, those eyes could stop me cold. I have a late debrief, probably 9. That's fine. I'll be up. She held my gaze for exactly 2 seconds, then looked back at her phone. Okay, that was it. That was the whole conversation. She rinsed her container, put it in the drying rack, picked up her keys and her cover, and walked out. The door didn't slam. It never slammed. Emily didn't slam doors, she closed them with quiet, decisive finality, which was somehow so much worse. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after that, coffee going cold in my hand, running through 5 years of marriage trying to find the exact moment it had stopped being a marriage and started being a military exercise in cohabitation. The first year had been good. Better than good, it had been extraordinary, the kind of thing people write songs about. Emily was brilliant and funny in the dry, understated way that crept up on you. She was fiercely private but achingly tender in the moments when she let her guard down, which happened mostly at night, in the dark, when it was just the two of us and the rest of the world had stopped watching. She had cried at our wedding, controlled tears, 2 of them, 1 from each eye, which I had wiped away with my thumb, and she had allowed, leaning her face into my hand for just a moment before pulling back and laughing at herself. Don't tell anyone, she'd whispered. Never, I'd said. I had kept every promise I'd ever made to Emily. That was the thing that made the coldness so devastating. I hadn't cheated, hadn't lied, hadn't failed her professionally or financially or emotionally. I had built my engineering firm from 2 employees to 18. I had moved us into a house in Fayetteville with a yard and a kitchen she'd pointed at in a magazine once and said, half to herself, that's beautiful. I had cooked dinners and remembered anniversaries and driven 4 hours to surprise her with lunch on a day she'd texted me that the week was brutal. I had loved her the way you love someone when you're completely sure they're the one, fully, consistently, without reservation. And somewhere in the 3rd year, she had started pulling away. It was subtle at first. Less conversation at dinner. More evenings with paperwork spread across the dining table. Fewer moments of her reaching for me first, initiating touch, starting the small intimacies that told you someone still wanted you in their space. I'd told myself it was the promotion. She'd made lieutenant colonel at 35, which was remarkable, which came with pressure I couldn't fully understand. I gave her room. I gave her patience. I gave her time. What I got back was nothing. Less than nothing. A gradual withdrawal so complete that by the time I was standing in the kitchen on that Tuesday morning in March, we felt less like husband and wife and more like 2 people unfortunate enough to share a mortgage. I'd tried talking about it. 3 separate times in the last year, I had sat her down and said some version of I feel like we're losing each other, and each time she had listened with that composed, unreadable expression she wore in briefing rooms and then said something like, I know things have been stressful, or, I'm doing my best, James, and nothing changed. After the 3rd time, I'd stopped trying to talk and started quietly devastated instead. I spent that Tuesday at my office drawing up a structural assessment for a county bridge renovation and not drawing it up at all, mostly staring at the plans and thinking about what I was going to say to her at 9 o'clock that night. I think we should separate. I need more than this. I deserve more than this. All true. All reasonable. All sentences that made my chest hurt like I was pressing on a bruise. Derek called it too. He was my oldest friend, had known me since undergrad, had stood beside me at my wedding. You eat lunch. Forgot. Men. I heard him exhale. How are you doing? I'm going to talk to her tonight. A pause. The talk. Yeah. You sure? No. Yes. I don't know, Derek. She looked at me this morning like I was a cabinet she couldn't decide whether to keep. I'm sorry, brother. He meant it. I could hear it. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. I got home at 6. The house was quiet in the way it always was when Emily wasn't there, which was a different quiet from when she was there but not talking to me, a distinction that probably said something sad about the state of things. I made dinner out of habit, pasta, simple, enough for 2, and ate half of it standing at the counter the same way she'd eaten her breakfast that morning. The irony wasn't lost on me. At 8:45, I heard her car in the driveway. I was sitting in the living room, the television off, hands around a glass of water I hadn't drunk. I heard her key in the lock. Heard her put her cover on the hook by the door, the soft sound of her footsteps, the briefest pause before she came around the corner and saw me. "You're up," she said. I said I would be. She sat down across from me in the armchair, still in her uniform, and clasped her hands in her lap, ready for a briefing, ready for whatever I had to say. God, she was so contained. Even now, even here, in her own home, she couldn't just be a person. I opened my mouth to say what I'd rehearsed, but then my phone buzzed on the cushion beside me and I glanced down automatically, and the name on the screen stopped me cold. Rachel. Rachel was Emily's closest friend from the academy. They'd served together, deployed together, the kind of friendship forged in circumstances most people never faced. She rarely contacted me directly. My stomach tightened. I held up a finger to Emily and answered, "James." Rachel's voice was strange, tight, like she'd been sitting on something for a long time. "I need to tell you something and I need you to listen before you say anything." "Rachel, she doesn't know I'm calling. She'd be furious. But I can't watch this anymore, and I think you deserve to know." A breath. Go into her study, the bottom left drawer of her desk. There's a photo album, dark green cover. Just go look at it, and then we'll talk. She hung up. I sat there for 3 seconds. Emily was watching me, something shifting in her expression, the first crack in the composure, a flicker of something that looked almost like fear. "James." I got up and walked to her study. She followed me. "What are you doing?" "James, what did Rachel?" I opened the bottom left drawer of her desk. The album was there, exactly where Rachel said. Dark green cover, worn at the corners, the kind of wear that comes from something being handled frequently. I picked it up and opened it, and I stopped breathing. It was full of photographs of me. Not formal photographs. Not posed ones. Candid shots, me laughing at something at a friend's cookout, years ago. Me asleep on the couch with a book open on my chest. Me in my hard hat at a job site, squinting into the sun, not knowing anyone was taking a picture. Me and Emily on our honeymoon, dancing on a resort terrace, both of us laughing, her face turned into my shoulder. Me in our kitchen, cooking, looking ridiculous in the apron she'd bought me as a joke. Between photographs, she had tucked small handwritten notes. I unfolded one. "He made the coffee exactly right this morning. He always does. He pays attention to things I've never told him and sometimes I can't look at him because it makes my chest hurt." I unfolded another. "He tried to hold my hand last night and I pulled away and I could see it on his face. I hate myself. I don't know why I do this. I don't know why I keep hurting him." And another. "He doesn't know that I take this out when I can't sleep. He doesn't know that I haven't slept more than 4 hours without waking up since this started. He doesn't know that I'm terrified. I've been terrified for 2 years and I don't know how to stop." I looked up. Emily was standing in the doorway of her study, still in her uniform, and she was not composed. For the first time in what felt like years, she was not composed at all. Her jaw was tight, her eyes bright, her hands gripping the doorframe like she needed it to stay upright. "How long?" I said. My voice came out low. "How long have you been crying over these?" Her mouth opened, closed. "Emily." My hands were shaking around the album. "Rachel called me and told me to look in this drawer, and now I'm standing here holding photographs of myself with your handwriting between them, and I need you to explain this to me. Right now." "I can't." Her voice broke. I had never, in 5 years of marriage, heard Emily Hartley's voice break. It was the most alarming sound I had ever heard. "James, I can't have this conversation while I'm standing up." She walked past me, sat down in the chair at her desk, pressed both hands flat on the surface. I stayed where I was. I didn't trust myself to move. "Tell me," I said. "I know you're going to ask for a divorce." She said it flat and direct, the way she delivered mission briefs, but her voice was fraying at the edges. "I've been watching you prepare for it, the way you've been looking at me. I know that look. It's the look of someone who has made a decision and is just building the nerve. Then you should have talked to me before I built the nerve." "I know." She pressed harder on the desk. "I know, James. I don't have a defense for any of this. I know what I've done to you. I know how it looks. I know how it's felt. I didn't know how to stop and I didn't know how to explain it and so she exhaled. I kept shutting down. Why? It came out raw. 5 years of being slowly frozen out, and that was the whole question. Why, Emily? Because I have been here. I have been right here, every day, and you have made me feel like the most irrelevant person in your life, and I need to know why. The silence stretched long enough that I started to think she wouldn't answer. Then she said, quietly, my father. I went still. He was Army, you know that. Career officer, colonel, same path I'm on. And my mother, her throat worked. She loved him the way I watched you love me. Completely, without conditions. And he left. He left because the marriage was too much and the Army was easier, and she had loved him so hard that when he left it destroyed her. I watched it destroy her. She didn't get out of bed for 3 months, James. I was 16 and I was making dinners and managing the house and watching my mother grieve a living man. She looked at me, both eyes bright, both threatening, wholly unguarded for the first time in 2 years. And then I met you and I loved you like that. The same way. Exactly the same terrifying way. And I kept thinking, if I pull back, if I keep something in reserve, it won't destroy me the same way. If I don't let myself need you all the way, then when you leave, I'll survive it. She laughed, a single, painful sound. Brilliant plan. Worked beautifully. I sat down on the edge of her desk. I didn't trust my legs anymore. You thought I would leave. I thought everyone leaves. Emily. I set the album down carefully. I have never, in 5 years, given you a single reason to think I would leave. I know. It was barely a whisper. That almost made it worse. You were everything, James, and the more certain I was that I loved you, the more terrified I got, and the further I pulled away. And I know, her voice cracked completely this time, broke open and stayed open, and tears spilled over, and my chest split with it because this was Emily crying and Emily did not cry. I know that by protecting myself from the pain of losing you, I made you leave anyway. I know I did exactly the thing I was trying to prevent. I know. I should have stayed angry. I had arrived in that study with divorce on the tip of my tongue, 5 years of hurt packed into a neat, justified decision, and I should have held on to that. Any reasonable person would have held on to that. But this was Emily, my Emily, the one from the dark and the honest hours, sitting in a chair with her uniform still on and tears running down her face over a photograph album she'd been taking out in the night, alone, trying to hold on to a marriage she'd been quietly destroying with her own defenses. This was not a wife who didn't love me. This was a wife who loved me so much it had broken something in her. That didn't make the 5 years okay. That didn't erase what I'd lived through. But it changed the shape of it completely. I was going to ask for a divorce tonight, I said. I know. I still might. She nodded, very slightly. I know that too, but not tonight. I leaned forward, put my elbows on my knees, pressed my hands together. Tonight you're going to sit here and tell me everything. The whole thing. Every thought you've been having that you put in those notes instead of saying out loud. And I'm going to listen. And then we're going to figure out what we're going to do. James, all of it. Emily. I looked at her. You owe me that much. She owed me more than that. She knew it. I knew it. But she lifted her chin, the smallest version of her usual bearing, and she said, okay. And she talked. She talked for 2 hours. Past midnight. The uniform eventually gave way, jacket off, collar loosened, hair unpinned and falling to her shoulders, the full Emily underneath the rank finally sitting in the room with me. She talked about her mother, about her father, about the calculus of self-protection she'd built so carefully in her own mind. She talked about specific moments in our marriage that had terrified her by being too good, our second anniversary trip to Vermont, the night I'd stayed up with her until 3:30 when she couldn't stop her mind from running, the morning she'd come home from a 6-week deployment and I'd had the house clean and dinner ready and she'd walked in and just stood in the entryway and felt so loved it had made her physically sick with fear. Every time you were perfect, she said, somewhere around 1 in the morning, I panicked. And every time I panicked, I created distance. And then the distance became just how we were. And I didn't know how to close it because closing it meant being vulnerable, and being vulnerable meant you could destroy me, and I had watched that destruction and I couldn't. You could have told me this, I said, not accusing. Just the truth. Emily, you could have said any of this. I know. That's not something I could have fixed if I didn't know it existed. I know, James. She looked exhausted, hollowed out. I didn't know how to say it. I'm not, this. She gestured vaguely at the state of herself, the tears, the undone hair, the cracked composure. This isn't something I do. I don't know how to do this. You're doing it now. I'm doing it now because Rachel called you and you found the album and there's nothing left to protect. She met my eyes. I have nothing left to hide behind. I sat with that for a long time. Here is what I knew by 2 in the morning. My wife loved me. She had always loved me. She had loved me with such overwhelming terror that she'd spent 2 years slowly poisoning the thing she was trying to protect, like someone who grips a bird so tightly to keep it safe that they crush it. She was not cold. She was not indifferent. She was the most private, guarded, frightened person I had ever loved, and she had let me see exactly none of it, and it had cost us both enormously. Here is what else I knew. Love was not sufficient on its own. Love without accountability, love without change, love without the willingness to be known, that wasn't a partnership. That was just a feeling 2 people shared separately and never spoke about. I need you to see someone, I said. A therapist. Someone who can help you understand why you do this and how to stop. She tensed slightly. The old reflex. I can manage, Emily. My voice was firm. This is not me requesting. This is me telling you that if we are going to try to save this marriage, that is a non-negotiable condition. You cannot manage your way through this alone. You have been managing for 37 years and look where we are. A long pause. Then, quietly, okay, and we go together. Couples counseling. Both of us. Okay, and no more shutting down. If something scares you, if I do something that triggers that fear, you tell me. Out loud. With words. Not by pulling away for 3 weeks. Okay. Her voice was very small. I mean it, Emily. I can't keep living like this. I have been so lonely in this house, with you, and that is the saddest kind of lonely there is. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet again. I know. I'm so sorry. I know. I reached across the desk and took her hand. She looked down at our joined hands with an expression I can only describe as relief and terror in equal measure, like someone lowering their arms after holding them up for a very long time. I'm not promising you it's fine, I said. It's not fine. You put me through 2 years of feeling invisible and unwanted in my own marriage, and we're going to have to actually deal with that, not just acknowledge it. I understand. But I'm not walking out that door tonight. I squeezed her hand. We have something real here. We have always had something real here. I want to fight for it, but I cannot be the only one fighting. She turned her hand over and held mine properly, both of hers around one of mine, the way she used to do in the early years, and she said, "You won't be. I promise you, you won't be the only one fighting." I believed her. Not blindly. I had learned too much about the gap between what Emily felt and what Emily showed for blind belief. But I believed the version of her sitting in front of me now, stripped of her ranks and her composure and her walls, holding my hand in the small hours of a Tuesday night with her hair down and her face wet. The next morning, she called a therapist before she left for the base. I heard her making the appointment from the kitchen, and I stood there with my coffee and felt something move in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, not all the way, but the first shift toward it. The first evidence that the woman I'd fallen in love with was still in there and was willing to fight her own worst instincts to come back to me. The couple's counselor we eventually found was a woman named Dr. Patricia Cole, who had an office near downtown Fayetteville and the particular gift of making two people who were very bad at talking to each other actually talk. Emily's individual therapist was a man named Dr. Howard, a former military chaplain who understood something about the specific armor people put on in service and how much damage it could do in a life lived outside of combat. The first few sessions were genuinely awful in the way that necessary things often are. Emily sat beside me in Dr. Cole's office and tried to explain, using her usual precise and organized language, the emotional architecture of what she'd done, and Dr. Cole kept gently redirecting her away from the analysis and toward the feeling, and Emily kept visibly struggling with that distinction in a way that would have been almost funny if it hadn't been so painful to watch. I, for my part, talked about the loneliness, the years of reaching and not being reached back for, the particular humiliation of loving someone deeply and feeling like your love was being refused. I said things I'd never said out loud, that there had been moments in the last year where I'd wondered if I was simply not interesting enough, not engaging enough, not enough of something to make her want to be present with me. That I'd started to take her distance personally in the way you can't help taking things personally when they're done to you every day. Did you know he felt that way? Dr. Cole asked Emily. Emily looked at me. I suspected. I didn't let myself look at it directly. Why not? A long pause. Because if I acknowledged how much I was hurting him, I'd have to acknowledge why, and acknowledging why meant acknowledging the fear, and the fear was, she stopped. The fear was the thing I was most afraid of. Say that again, Dr. Cole said quietly. Emily looked at her, then back at me. I was afraid of being afraid. I was afraid that if I admitted how scared I was, it would confirm that the worst thing I believed, that I couldn't keep someone, was true, and by not admitting it, Dr. Cole asked. Emily's jaw tightened. I made it come true anyway. That moment, that particular moment in that particular session, about 3 weeks into counseling, was the first time I cried in front of another person about what our marriage had become. I didn't plan it and I wasn't comfortable with it and I think it startled all three of us. But Dr. Cole let it sit, and Emily turned to me and put her hand on my arm without flinching, and something shifted in the room and in us. It wasn't linear after that. Marriage repair isn't. There were weeks of genuine progress followed by a setback when Emily got a difficult assignment and reverted to silence by reflex, and I had to remind myself, and sometimes her, that the old pattern was a pattern, not a choice, and breaking it required catching it. There was one night in June where we had an argument so honest it scared both of us, where I said things I'd been holding for 2 years and she didn't retreat from them, just sat with them and said, "You're right, that's true." I did that, and it was the most painful and most connecting conversation we'd had in years. She had a physical transformation I didn't expect, as the anxiety that she'd been carrying alone began to surface and be processed in therapy. She softened. Not her competence, she was still Colonel Hartley at work, still precise and demanding and exceptionally good at her job, but at home, she began to be present in ways I'd forgotten she could be. She started reaching first sometimes, a hand on my shoulder as she passed, coffee made before I woke, small and deliberate gestures of the kind she'd stopped making years ago. She started talking at dinner. Not performing conversation, but actually talking, telling me things from her day, asking about mine with real curiosity, sitting across from me like she wanted to be there. One evening in August, 6 months after that night in her study, she cooked dinner. Emily rarely cooked, she was functional in the kitchen but it wasn't her domain. She'd been in there for an hour and a half when I got home, and the kitchen was a slight disaster and she was wearing an expression of concentrated determination that I associated with tactical planning. She'd made my mother's spaghetti sauce from the recipe I'd written out for her in year 2 of our marriage and never pushed her to use. I stood in the doorway and looked at her. She looked up. Something in her face opened. It might not be right. It's perfect, I said. You haven't tasted it. I know. She set down the wooden spoon and came around the counter, and she put her arms around me and pressed her face to my neck, and I felt her exhale, a long, slow, deliberate release that felt like something she'd been holding since long before I met her. I'm going to keep doing better, she said quietly. I need you to know that. I know, I said. And I know I don't deserve. Stop. I held her tighter. We're not doing the accounting anymore. That's not what this is. She was quiet for a moment. Okay, we're building something, I said. Forward. That's the whole project. She lifted her head and looked at me, gray eyes clear in a way I hadn't seen them in years, no wall behind them. Okay, she said again, differently this time. We ate dinner at our kitchen table with the window open and the August air coming through, and she told me about a logistics problem she'd been solving all week, and I told her about the bridge renovation, and we talked until the plates were cold and the light changed, and it felt, quietly, carefully, without fanfare, like being married. Rachel came to visit in September. Emily told her what had happened the night she called, which Emily had not known the full extent of until then. Rachel had apparently been watching us deteriorate for 18 months and had sat on it until she couldn't anymore, until the night she'd heard the fear in Emily's voice on the phone and decided that her friend's pride mattered less than her friend's marriage. Emily was furious with her for approximately 48 hours. Then she called her and said, "Thank you," and Rachel said, "I know," and that was apparently that, because their friendship was composed of people who did not require extensive emotional processing. I took Rachel to coffee while Emily was at the base and said, "I want you to know what you did that night. James, you saved my marriage. And probably me. Because I was an hour away from walking out that door and I don't think I would have come back." Rachel looked at her coffee for a moment. "She's been terrified her whole life," she said. "Since before she was in the army. I watched her build that wall in the academy and I knew it was going to be a problem when she actually let someone in. I just didn't know how to tell her that without her shutting me out too. You found a way." I went around her. She smiled slightly. She would have hated that, if it hadn't worked. She kind of did hate it. Yeah, well. Rachel shrugged. She got over it. By winter, we had stopped going to Dr. Cole weekly and moved to twice a month, which she said was appropriate progress. Emily was still seeing Dr. Howard every 2 weeks and had started, I noticed, talking about her father in ways she never had before, not with resolution yet, but without the full armor. One Sunday morning in December she told me the whole story of the day her father left, sitting at our kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug, and I listened to all of it, and at the end she said, "I think I've been punishing you for something he did. For most of our marriage. And I'm sorry." "I know," I said. "That's not an excuse. I know that too." She nodded, looked out the window at the December light, thin and gray. "Dr. Howard says the fear probably won't go away completely. It'll just become something I recognize and can respond to rather than something that runs the show." That sounds right. I want to respond to it better. She looked at me. I want to be someone you feel loved by. Every day. Not just the days I'm not afraid. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. "You're getting there." She turned her hand over and held mine, both of hers, the way she'd done that night in her study. "Together," she said. "Together," I said. Our 5th anniversary came in February. I had been trying to find the right way to mark it, not a celebration of a year that had been peaceful, because it hadn't been, but an acknowledgement of what we'd come through. I settled on a dinner reservation at the restaurant where we'd had our first date, a drive down to Raleigh, the place where I'd looked at her across a white tablecloth and known with complete certainty that I was finished with every alternative. She wore the same dress she'd worn that night, which she had apparently kept, which she never mentioned, which I noticed immediately and did not say anything about until we were at the table and she caught me looking. "I thought it was time I wore it again," she said. "You found it." "I never lost it." She met my eyes. "I've known where it was since we got married." I was quiet for a moment, taking that in, the dress she'd never worn again but never thrown away, the photograph album she'd taken out at night when she couldn't sleep, the notes she'd written about the coffee and the hand she'd pulled away from and the love she'd been carrying alone because she didn't know how to share it without risking it. "Emily," I said. I need you to know that I'm not going anywhere." She looked at me with those gray eyes. "I know," she said. "I'm starting to actually believe it." "Good. She paused, and her mouth curved. a small, real smile. It's very inconvenient, how much I love you. I laughed. It startled her, the way my laughter still sometimes did when she caught it off guard, and then she laughed too, quietly, her shoulders dropping, her face fully open. The restaurant was warm and the food was good and we stayed for 3 hours. We talked about everything and nothing, a project I was bidding on, a junior officer she was mentoring who reminded her uncomfortably of herself at 25, the possibility of a trip in the spring somewhere neither of us had been. I watched her face across the table, the face I had fallen in love with at 32, and I thought about the men I'd been that morning in the kitchen with cold coffee and divorce on the tip of my tongue, and the night in her study with her handwriting between photographs, and the 2 hours of her voice breaking open in the dark, and all the weeks and sessions and arguments and dinners and moments that had followed. I thought about what it costs to love someone completely, the particular terror of it, and how Emily had spent years trying to pay that cost with only the appearance of not caring, which is the most expensive way there is. I thought about Rachel calling me with that tight, careful voice, "Go look in the drawer." I thought about opening a green album and finding my own face. "What are you thinking?" Emily said. "That I'm glad Rachel called me." She looked at her wine. "Me too. Even though it was the most embarrassing night of my life." "You cried." I cried. She said it like a military after-action report. "In uniform. 2 tears on our wedding day," I said. "Don't tell anyone." She looked up and there it was, the smile from that night, the one she'd hidden against my shoulder, the one I'd been waiting to see again for longer than I'd known I was waiting. "You remembered that," she said. "I remember everything about you, Emily." She was quiet for a moment, and then she reached across the table and took my hand, right there in the restaurant, unhesitating, nothing pulled back. "I know," she said. "I'm working on deserving that." "You don't have to deserve it," I said. "You just have to show up." She held my hand through dessert and through the drive home, and she didn't let go when we got to the house, just held it through the dark entryway and into the light, and it felt like the beginning of something, though really it was just the continuation, the ongoing, imperfect, real, and chosen continuation of the only marriage I'd ever wanted. That was 2 years ago now. Emily still sees Dr. Howard once a month. We go to Dr. Cole every 6 weeks, which she says is maintenance and I say is the best 60 minutes of every 6 weeks. My firm won a regional design award in the spring, which Emily attended and clapped for with the particular precision of someone who is very proud and trying not to be visibly emotional about it, which I found extremely charming. She made colonel last fall, full colonel, which is something most people in her field don't make, and I took the whole office out to dinner to celebrate, which embarrassed her and which she talked about for weeks. We went to Portugal in March, a week in Lisbon and the coast, and Emily stood on a cliff above the Atlantic with the wind in her hair and her uniform 10 miles away and laughed at something I said loud and open and unguarded, the way she laughs sometimes now, and I took her picture because I wanted to remember her face in that moment, free of every wall she'd ever built. She saw it later. "Don't show that to anyone," she said. "Never," I said. She smiled. We both knew what we were saying. The album is still in her desk drawer. I know because I've seen her take it out, not late at night alone anymore, but sometimes in the evenings, she'll sit at her desk and open it and I'll walk by and see her looking at it with an expression that is nothing like what I would have imagined a year ago. Not grief, not secret fear, just the face of someone looking at evidence of something real, something that held even when she tried her hardest to make it not hold. She caught me watching once. "I keep meaning to add to it," she said. "Add what?" "More pictures." She closed it and held it in her hands. "From after." I went and sat on the edge of her desk, the way I'd done the night I first held it. "From after the terrifying part." "The terrifying part isn't over." She looked up at me. "But it's different now. It's the kind of terrifying where you go toward the thing instead of away from it." "That's just called love," I said. She considered that with the seriousness she gave everything. "Yes," she said finally. "I suppose it is." I took the album from her hands and opened it to the last page. Put my hand over hers. "Add to it," I said. "That sounds right." She leaned her head against my shoulder, briefly, and then she straightened up, because she was still Emily, and picked up a pen from her desk. And on the last page, below the last photograph, me and her in Portugal, the cliff, the ocean, her laughing into the wind, she wrote something small and took her time with it. I read it when she went to bed. "He told me I don't have to deserve it." I'm starting to believe him. I think that might be what love actually is. I closed the album and put it back in the drawer and turned off the light. Outside, the night was quiet and cool, and upstairs my wife was asleep in our bed, and tomorrow morning I would make the coffee exactly right, the way she'd always noticed and never said, and she would come downstairs and we would stand in the kitchen together, not as strangers, not as roommates, not as 2 people managing the space between them, but as 2 people who had almost lost each other to silence and fear and chosen, deliberately, imperfectly, every single day, not to. That is the whole story. The beginning of it was a morning with cold coffee and a decision I almost made. The middle of it was a phone call and a green album and a woman in a uniform crying without composure for the first time in years. The end of it, if there is an end, which I don't think there is, because this is the kind of story that keeps going, is a note in her handwriting on the last page of a book full of photographs of a man she loved so much she was terrified, which is the most Emily way there could possibly be to say I love you. I wouldn't trade a day of it, not even the hard ones. Especially not the hard ones.